The scriptures tell us of David's victory, a boy with a sling, a giant with a spear, and a moment that shook kingdoms. But what of the night before? What of the boy when the crowd was gone, when the armor was set aside, and when silence was his only companion? This is an unwritten verse, a prayer spoken not to men, but to the dark hours of the night. Beneath a sky heavy with stars, David sat alone. The camp of Israel lay restless behind him, and across the valley the Philistine fires burned like watchful eyes. He held a sling in one hand, smooth stones in the other, as if the touch of them might steady the storm within his chest. He was a shepherd, not a soldier. A boy, not a king. The anointing oil of Samuel still clung to his memory, but the laughter of his brother stung deeper. You are only a boy. Go back to your sheep. Tonight, their words returned, heavier than the armor he refused to wear. Lord, what am I doing here? I have faced lions. I have faced bears. But this man is no beast of the field. He is a mountain clothed in bronze. His voice shakes the earth. My knees grow weak even as I think of him. They were right. Eliab was right. He looked at me with that scorn, that familiar heavy look he'd worn since I was a child. You came to see the carnage. You leave a few sheep and come here to chase a glory you haven't earned. Those words, they echo louder than the thunder of the giant's feet. And I hate that a part of me believes him. That my bravery is simply vanity dressed up as faith. A foolish pride that will get a boy killed and bring shame to a nation. David dragged a thin fleece closer, the chill of the desert night seeping into his bones. It was a cold that had nothing to do with the air and everything to do with the weight of expectation. He was alone. The men of Israel, his brothers among them, had retreated into their tents, defeated before the battle had begun. But he could not. He was bound by an oath spoken not on the battlefield, but in the solitude of the hills. He felt the rough cords of the sling, frayed from years of guarding sheep. It was a tool of his trade, and now the vessel of his destiny. He closed his eyes and saw the face of Eliab, ruddy with anger, yesterday afternoon. Eliab had gripped his arm, his eyes burning with years of suppressed resentment. You speak of God's honor, little brother. You should be honoring our father, tending his flock. You were always too proud for your own good. You think one act of obedience will erase the oil Samuel poured on your head? That mistake. This is not a song you can write away. Go home, David, before you shame us all. It was the shame that stung, not the danger. The shame of being a fool who had promised too much. Yet I remember the oil. The thick, viscous oil. It smelled of cedar and something ancient. When Samuel poured it over my head, it felt like a silent fire, and the words, "You are chosen." What did that choice mean? Was it a prophecy of kingship, or simply a duty to stand when all others knelt? Did God choose me to win, or simply to witness? What if I'm only meant to stand, not to conquer? It wasn't just Eliab. He saw his father Jesse standing in the doorway when Samuel first arrived. Jesse had proudly paraded 7 older, stronger sons. He hadn't even called David in from the fields until the prophet insisted. The memory was sharp, his father's polite confusion, the slight slump of his shoulders when Samuel chose the youngest. Jesse had looked at David not with pride, but with a weary, questioning stare that said, "Are you sure, prophet?" "He's only a shepherd." That look was a deeper wound than Eliab's scorn. It confirmed his greatest fear. He was an anomaly. He was an error in the grand design, chosen despite his weakness, not because of some hidden strength. David's fingers tightened around a stone. He turned it over and over as if searching for courage in its smooth edges. The voices of Israel's warriors reached him, some in prayer, others in despair. None dared step forward. None but him. And the weight of that choice pressed on his chest like a boulder. He ran his thumb over the stone's perfect curve, thinking, if this is the weapon of the Lord, then let it be true. Let its perfection cover my fear. Will I be remembered as a fool, Lord? Will I die before the sun rises? Or will they speak of me as the boy who believed too much? I see the shame in the soldiers' eyes. They are veterans, men of war. They whisper about Saul's failure, their strength dissolving under the sheer audacity of the giant's curses. And now they look at me, a boy, and see either salvation or the final cruel joke before their destruction. I came here to deliver cheese and bread, and instead, I am asked to save a nation. No one here believes in me. Not the king, not my family, not even the grizzled warriors. Just hours ago, a veteran soldier, a grizzled man named Nahor, had pulled David aside, his voice a low plea. Son, don't do this. He is not a man. He is a force. I saw him take a javelin to the chest yesterday, and it merely skipped off the bronze. Go. Your faith is a wonderful thing, but it will be shattered like a child's toy. Save yourself for another war. This one is already lost. That was the true defeat. The soldiers believed the war was lost, and they wanted David to save his life, not their honor. David's senses sharpened in the dark. He could hear the low, despairing murmur of the men in the tents, the soft clink of weapons being handled without conviction, the muffled sound of a man weeping softly into his cloak. This army was not sleeping. It was waiting for the sun to rise and confirm its doom. He was breathing the air of failure. He was surrounded by men whose courage had been liquefied by a single mocking voice. And the weight of that collective shame settled onto his small, solitary space. The stars above glittered coldly, indifferent to the battles of men. David lifted his eyes to them and wondered if God still watched. He had sung of green pastures, of still waters, of a shepherd's care. But tonight, his song was silence. His psalm was fear. And his prayer was raw, desperate, unshaped by melody. See me, O Lord. Do not turn your face away. If I must fall, let it not be in shame. If I must rise, let it not be in pride. Only let your name remain when mine is dust. The weight of this silence, it is crushing. I feel the years of waiting, the years of mockery, the years of my father's quiet doubt, all pressing down. I am so small. He slipped his sandals on and walked a few quiet paces toward the royal camp. He heard a different sound there. The heavy, unmistakable sigh of King Saul from his royal tent. The king, rejected by God, was paralyzed. He was a great warrior, chosen for his stature, yet fear had stripped the armor from his soul. It was a sign. Human strength had failed. And the thought struck David with terrifying clarity. If I fail, Saul's failure will be complete. The dynasty is already dust. I cannot rely on a man's strength, not even a king's. I must rely on the name I was taught to sing in the fields. He returned to his fire, which was now little more than a bed of glowing embers. The fire gave no heat, offered no comfort. He turned the stone over once more, his final silent communion with the moment. His psalm was fear, and his prayer was raw, desperate, unshaped by melody. He was no longer David, the shepherd. He was David, the last defender of the covenant. Sound cues. Distant thunder rolls faintly in the background. A lone harp string plucks softly, almost like a memory. The boy who once sang to the hills now whispered to the silence. Tomorrow the world would see his sling. But tonight, heaven alone saw his trembling hands. The hour was late, and the shadow of the giant was growing. The valley lay shrouded in silence. David's fire was dead. Only the wind moved, carrying the sounds of the enemy. On one side, the armies of Israel, weary, broken, unwilling to rise. On the other, the Philistines emboldened, mocking, their champion's shadow stretching across the night. And in the middle, a boy who could not sleep. David rose to his feet and stepped away from the glow of the distant campfires. His hand brushed the sling at his side. He felt its rough cords. It had been enough for lions, enough for bears. But was it enough for a giant who defied the living God? Lord, I'm only a boy. Why me? Why now? The men here, they say the giant is not just a warrior, but a shaman, a son of Dagon. They whisper that his bronze armor is not just metal, but is etched with Philistine curses and dark charms. Curses meant to repel Israelite steel. They say the armor is dedicated to their idol, that the giant's strength comes from a demonic, binding pact, that my strength would fail because the very earth beneath his feet is his ally. This is not just a fight against muscle. This is a battle against a fortified darkness. Across the valley, the enemy's fires burned brighter, and in the glow, David could almost see the shape of the giant, towering, armored, immovable. He closed his eyes, but the image would not leave him. Goliath's shadow filled his thoughts, pressing in until fear itself seemed to take form. He could almost smell the brine and sea salt of the Philistine camp, the air thick with their pagan chants. My sling feels like nothing compared to the sword that giant carries. If I fall, Lord, will they mock you? Will they say your name is weak because I was weak? Will the nations laugh at Israel because of me? That is the question that crushes me. Not the loss of my life, but the blasphemy that will follow my failure. They will say Dagon, God of the sea, is greater than the God who parted the sea. I can bear death, but I cannot bear the dishonor of the covenant. He remembered the lion, the sharp smell of blood, the scream of the lamb, the massive paw tearing at the flesh. He remembered the pure, mindless animal rage. But he faced the lion in the wilderness, a secret battle known only to the wind and the stars. No one watched. No one judged. This battle, this is different. Tomorrow, the eyes of two nations would rest on him. It's a stage set for either the greatest deliverance or the most profound humiliation. The lion was a test of my body. Goliath is a test of my God. If I die, my end is nothing. But your name, your glory, that is everything. I am but a piece of dust, Lord, but use me. If my blood must fall, let it fall to honor you. David realized his fear was no longer physical. It was spiritual. It was a terror born of love for the divine name. He was afraid to fail God. He was afraid to be the vessel through which the world would deem the Almighty powerless. This fear was a fire, burning away his earthly resolve, leaving only pure, terrifying duty. If I die, they will not see the boy. They will see the failure of my God. And the other armies, the nations who worship Baal and Dagon, they will take this as proof that their idols are stronger than the Lord of hosts. This shame will cling to Israel for generations. This burden is too great. Give this task to Abner, to a true general, not to the least of Jesse's sons. I am utterly unworthy of this public test. He walked the edge of the camp, keeping to the shadows. He heard two soldiers whispering, their voices raw with panic. They were talking about Goliath's legend, a legend far older than his appearance this week. They say he took a city by himself once, whispered the first, his voice ragged. They say his skin is thicker than a shield, and that he feeds his helmet with the blood of sacrificed bulls to make it proof against axes. Iron cannot pierce him. It just skips off the bronze. It's not armor, it's a moving fortress. And the charm, whispered the second, his voice barely audible. They say he has a special charm, one that confuses the eye. He seems closer than he is. He seems slower than he is. It is a curse upon the eyes of his enemies. A sorcerer's trick. No one can strike a target they cannot see clearly. The word struck David like a chill wind, a spiritual blindness, not just physical strength. His sling was useless if the stone could be deflected by an invisible hand or a sorcerer's charm. His weapon was simple, but his enemy was using unseen forces. A curse upon the eye. That is the real battle. Not with the bronze, but with the illusion. My fight is to see clearly, when every soldier, every general, every brother has been blinded by fear. If I am to win, I must see past the illusion of his size and his charms, and see only the truth. He is a man defying an infinite God. My stone must be guided by a power greater than the Philistine gods. He sank to his knees once more, the weight of the collective despair of physical pressure on his back. The minor harp strings returned in the soundtrack, quiet, lonely. He was alone, but he realized the valley itself was full of voices. The voice of his brother, the voice of the frightened soldiers, the voice of the roaring giant, and the quiet, persistent voice of his own fear. All of them shouting the same message: you will fail. God of my fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they trusted your promise. And I stand here on the edge of your covenant, afraid to move. Am I tempting you with my arrogance? What if God had chosen the wrong one? If I die, my end is nothing. But your name, your glory, that is everything. I am but a piece of dust, Lord, but use me. If my blood must fall, let it fall to honor you. Let the nations know that you do not need a king's armor or a seasoned warrior. You only need a willing, trembling heart. He looked at the piece of wood he had brought, his shepherd's staff, leaning against the rock. It was chipped, worn smooth by his hands, and stained with the blood of the beasts he had killed to protect his flock. The staff wasn't a weapon for Goliath, but it was a symbol of his duty. I defended the sheep with this staff. I will defend Israel with my life. The Lord is my shepherd. He gives me the staff. He gives me the sling. I will not fear, because he is with me. The fear was still there. It did not vanish, but it changed. It was no longer a paralyzing force, but a burning fuel. David had accepted his own weakness, and in doing so, had opened himself to a divine strength. He was no longer trying to be the hero. He was only trying to be faithful. The silent, terrifying battle of Segment 2 had ended. He was ready for the dawn. Having wrestled with fear, David now turned to the only weapon he truly trusted, the Word. He rose from the dirt, his body still heavy with exhaustion, but his heart now quiet. He looked up at the endless desert sky, not just in prayer, but in declaration. This wasn't a memory. It was a vow. He spoke the words he had sung 1,000 times, but now they were not poetry. They were prophecy. The Lord is my shepherd, so I lack nothing. I lack no sword. I lack no shield, because you are my provider. My brothers accuse me of vanity, but I came to this valley with empty hands to prove that you alone are enough. He leads me past the still waters, the very waters I collected from the brook for my sling. He restores my soul, which just minutes ago was shattered by fear. He leads me in the paths of righteousness, for his name's sake. That is why I am here, This is not about saving my life. It is about vindicating your name. My name is small, but your name is forever. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, this valley of Elah tomorrow, I will walk it. I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod, my shepherd's staff, the symbol of my protection, and your staff, my sling, the instrument of my defense. They comfort me. They are my only comfort. This staff is proof I am a caretaker. This sling is proof I am a defender. I will use them both to testify of your power. His voice broke, but he pressed on. He was singing the future into existence. Every syllable was an act of courage. Every line was a stone thrown against the giant's shield. He wasn't just quoting scripture. He was performing spiritual warfare against the darkness that clung to the valley. The giant was a curse upon the land, and David was speaking the counter-curse of the Lord Almighty. He closed his eyes and summoned the most potent memory of his life. The day Samuel came, the house of Jesse smelled of sheepskin and wood smoke. But when the prophet arrived, the air changed. It became thick with cedar and foreign spices, something powerful and ancient. He saw his 7 tall, handsome brothers standing proud and clean. He, David, was dirty, smelling of the sheep pen, hastily cleaned but still marked by the fields. Jesse had passed all 7 before Samuel, and the prophet was silent. The memory of that silence was the deepest point of his past despair. They were good men, his brothers, loyal, strong. Why not one of them? When Samuel said, "Are these all your sons?" the question was a stinging accusation to Jesse and an unexpected summons to David. He rushed in, confused, breathless, his heart pounding not with fear, but bewilderment. And then the oil. Samuel poured it generously. It was thick, warm, and ran down David's hair, across his forehead, and onto his rough cloak. He felt the weight of it. Not heavy, but profound. A tangible feeling of heat that settled in his bones. He saw the looks on his brothers' faces, not just scorn now, but shock and jealousy. This boy, the field mouse, the songwriter, he, the chosen. That oil was not a gift of glory. It was a mark of duty. It sealed a contract. I was chosen when I was weakest, least impressive, and dirtiest. God chose the thing despised to show that power rests only with him. If God could choose me then, he can certainly use me now. I'm not fighting for a crown. I'm fighting to justify the prophet's oil, to validate the choice that stunned my family and my heart. The oil is my true armor, and it smells of promise. He remembered standing before Saul. The king had been surprisingly kind, but utterly defeated. Saul's armor was magnificent, gleaming, vast, designed for a giant of a man. But when David put it on, it was not protection. It was an immediate, suffocating prison. The bronze plates were so heavy they dragged his shoulders down. The helmet obscured his vision, making the world seem dark and constricted. Worse than the weight was the sound of the armor. Every movement brought a clanging, metallic symphony of despair, the sound of human confidence failing under God's judgment. David had to shout over the noise to the paralyzed king, "I cannot go with these, for I have not proven them." The truth was, the armor didn't just not fit my body, it didn't fit my spirit. It was tainted. It smelled of Saul's fear and his lost favor with God. To wear it would be to fight under a banner of past failure. It represented the power of the flesh, tallness, strength, and human pride, which God had already rejected. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I rejected it because I would not be defined by Saul's failure. I could not fight in his power. I could only fight in God's. Saul fights with steel and despair. I must fight with faith and the stone. The king was tall, strong, and anointed, yet he trembled in his tent. The shepherd was slight, unarmored, and alone, yet he stood firm in the open valley. This was the core difference. Saul feared loss, David pursued honor. The honor of God. The king was a body without a spirit. The shepherd was a spirit waiting for its body to act. He thought of his father, Jesse, and the sheep that still grazed the fields of Bethlehem. What if I never return? What if my story ends here, unknown and forgotten? For a moment, the fear returned. His knees grew weak. But then, deep within, came a stillness. Not loud, not thunderous, but quiet, like a shepherd's song in the night. A reminder that he was never truly alone. The Lord who helped me guard those few sheep will guard this entire flock of Israel. David looked up at the sky, where the morning sun now fought the darkness on the horizon. He whispered one final prayer. Lord, let my hand be steady. Let my heart be yours. And if I fall, let me fall in faith. Let my final act be one of trust. With that, he walked toward the field. He reached into his shepherd's pouch. Not 5 random stones, but 5 messengers of judgment. He had searched the brook for hours, seeking perfect roundness, stones that would spin true, unaffected by the wind. He touched them one by one, dedicating each one to a truth he had learned in the silence. The first stone was for faith, a silent vow that God was real, not a distant memory. The second stone was for shame, a weapon aimed at the Philistine mockery of God. The third stone was for Israel, a silent prayer for the nation, for the men who stood trembling behind him. The fourth stone was for the lion and the bear, a testament that past training, no matter how small, leads to future deliverance. The fifth stone was a spare, for the sheer impossibility of the fight, for the contingency of human weakness. The assurance that even if he missed the first 4 times, God would still give him one last chance. As the camp stirred awake, David stepped outside once more. Soldiers sharpened swords, strapped armor to trembling bodies, and muttered prayers under their breath. None looked at him, the boy with no armor, no sword, only faith. The morning air was sharp, carrying with it the guttural chants of the Philistines. From across the valley, their taunts rolled like thunder. Send out your champion! Or bow before ours. Each step was heavy, yet resolute, a boy carrying the weight of kings. He was walking into the most public moment of his life, completely naked of conventional defense. He wasn't just walking to fight Goliath. He was walking to fulfill the prophecy of the oil. He was walking to prove that the simple, often mocked faith of the shepherd was the highest form of power in the universe. He paused at the edge of the Israelite line and glanced back at his brothers. They were watching him now, their faces pale, stripped of their scorn. In their eyes, he saw not hatred, but pity and fear. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. Their opinion no longer mattered. Only the opinion of the God who had called him. He gripped the smooth, worn handle of his sling, the leather familiar and comforting in his hand. He was ready to exchange the world's doubt for divine certainty. The valley of Elah stretched wide, the morning sun spilling gold across its ridges. He took a breath, the cold air filling his lungs. On one side, the armies of Israel silent. On the other, the Philistines roaring. David walked into the space between them. No armor, no shield bearer, no sword at his side. Just a shepherd's sling, a pouch of stones, and the unshakable name of the God he carried in his heart. The valley of Elah stretched wide, the morning sun spilling gold across its ridges. On one side stood the army of Israel, silent, anxious, their courage long spent. On the other side, the Philistines roared in unison, their champion towering among them like a mountain of flesh and iron. David walked alone into the space between them. No armor, no shield bearer, no sword at his side. Just a shepherd's sling, a pouch of stones, and the name of the God he carried in his heart. Goliath saw him and laughed, a deep, thunderous sound that echoed across the valley. The sound was not just scorn, it was a noise of utter certainty. David felt the ground tremble beneath his sandals. He saw the sheer impossible bulk of the man, the shining cursed bronze, the spearhead like a weaver's beam. Every logical thought screamed at him to run, to drop the sling and beg for mercy. But the stillness was there, a cool anchor in his chest, whispering, "The giant is fortified by Dagon's lies. You are fortified by God's truth." Goliath's voice boomed, rattling the shields of the Israelite camp. "Is this what Israel sends? A boy with sticks? Come closer, child, so I can feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Your King Saul is a coward, and your God is silent. I will tear the flesh from your bones, shepherd, and my dogs will feast on your anointed head. Are you so desperate you send me a child? Do you think I am a dog that you come at me with mere sticks?" He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his heavy armor groaning under his own weight. The sound was like two grinding stones. Slow, terrifying, inexorable. He was not just mocking David, he was mocking the entire concept of the small, singular God of Israel. "I curse you by my gods, Dagon and Baal. You will not leave this valley. I will make an example of you. Your death will be a prayer to my champions. This mockery ends now. Come and meet your grave." David stood his ground, the cool morning air a sharp contrast to the fire in his veins. He realized the taunts were a final trap, designed to push him past fear into blind panic. But he had dealt with panic all night. He would not give Goliath the satisfaction. He tightened his grip on the sling, feeling the subtle difference in the leather, the familiar give and take that meant control. He was not a soldier, but he was a master of his chosen tool. He was a master of distance, of velocity, of impact. He was a master of precision. I will not look at his size. I will not listen to his curses. I will see only the single, vulnerable patch of flesh. I will see past the illusion. The taunt cut through the silence. Soldiers on both sides waited for David to falter. Surely he would tremble, turn back, beg for mercy. But instead, David lifted his voice, his words carried by the morning wind, amplified by a conviction that was absolute. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, and your bronze charms, your curses, and the pride of your whole nation. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. You speak of your gods, Dagon, the fish god, and Baal, the failed rain god. Gods who are silent. Gods who require the blood of your own children. I serve the God who created the mountains you stand on, the God who parted the Red Sea, the God who gives breath to all life. You are an image of wood and bronze, but my God is a living fire. You have insulted our banners, our prayers, and the very concept of a covenant-keeping God. You see my lack of armor and think it is weakness. I tell you, it is a testament. I have no need for Saul's tainted steel, because the Lord is my shield. I am here to prove that all the weaponry of man is dust before the breath of the divine. This day I will show you and your armies, and every pagan nation watching, that the Lord saves not by the abundance of iron, nor by the strength of the warrior, but by his own will. You are too great to be killed by a man. Therefore, you will be killed by God. Today the Lord will deliver you into my hands. Not for my fame, not for my kingdom, not for a prize of gold, but that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, so that the world will witness the Lord's vengeance. Your life ends now, not by my will, but by the will of the God you blasphemed." For a moment, even the Philistines fell silent. The boy's voice did not shake. His eyes did not flinch. David felt the final, total release of his fear. The stone in his pouch was no longer a piece of rock. It was the physical manifestation of God's answer to Goliath's blasphemy. This was his single perfect act of worship. He was merely the hand that held the sling. God was the force that guided the stone. He felt a sudden, profound calm. The noise of the two armies faded. There was only the giant, the stone, and the vast watching presence of God. This moment was written long ago, and I am simply the one chosen to read it aloud. David reached into his pouch, fingers brushing over the smooth stones. He drew the stone of faith. He placed it in his sling. Time seemed to slow. His heart steadied, not because the giant was small, but because his God was great. He adjusted his stance, planting his feet firmly in the dust of the valley. He was home. This was his pasture, and Goliath was the wolf that threatened the flock. He began to swing the sling, not wildly, not in a panic, but with the measured, disciplined rhythm he had honed over 1,000 solitary hours. The small leather cup whirled faster and faster, generating an impossible whistling velocity. David's eyes were fixed, not on Goliath's intimidating armor, but on the single vulnerable patch of skin above the giant's nose, the only part of the skull exposed. He saw past the curses, past the magic, past the size. He saw only the target provided by the providence of God. He felt the moment of perfect tension, the precise fraction of a second, when the centrifugal force reached its peak, demanding release. The muscles in his arm, forged by wrestling mountain lions, obeyed instantly. He opened the finger loop. The stone was released. It flew, a dark streak against the morning sun, propelled by years of training and divine purpose. It was a vessel of destiny, achieving a speed no javelin could match. It struck the giant, not on his armor, but on the precise, single spot of vulnerable flesh, the forehead. The sound was not a thud, but a sickening, sharp crack. The force was unimaginable, transferring all the stone's velocity directly to the giant's skull, shattering his concentration in his life in a single instant. The stone penetrated, silencing the mocking voice forever. Goliath's iron helmet, the symbol of his fortified power, could not save him. David did not close his eyes. He watched the tiny projectile fly true. He watched as the massive force of the giant's momentum, which had made him so terrifying, now worked against him. The mountain of bronze swayed. The massive, defiant head lolled back. And then, slowly, impossibly, the giant of terror began to fall. The fall of Goliath was not fast. It was a slow, crushing sound of shattering metal and displaced earth. The ground shook as the champion of the Philistines, the embodiment of terror and dark magic, collapsed into the dust with a deafening crash. The entire narrative of the war stopped. A sudden, deafening silence fell over the valley, more profound than any noise. The Philistines were paralyzed. The Israelites were speechless. In the absolute quiet, David could hear only his own steady breath. He stood there, the empty sling dangling from his hand. He looked down at the inert mass of the giant, the symbol of fear, now reduced to a pile of scrap metal. He knew the battle wasn't over. He had to finish the sign. He dropped the sling, ran to the giant, and drew the massive, absurdly long sword from Goliath's own scabbard. The blade was 7 feet long, cumbersome, yet in David's hand, It became the instrument of divine judgment. He used the giant's power against the giant himself. It was the final perfect act of defiance and prophecy fulfilled. David severed the giant's head, and with that single bloody act, the silence broke. The Philistine army, whose entire courage rested on the cursed body of their champion, let out a unified, panicked scream and broke rank. Their faith was shattered. Their charms were useless. Their god Dagon had abandoned them. The Israelites, suddenly realizing their deliverance, their fear instantly transformed into righteous fury, rose up from the ridges with a collective battle cry that shook the heavens. The rout was complete. The shepherd boy had won a nation's freedom. He stood, breathless, with Goliath's head in his hands, not in triumph, but in a kind of profound spiritual exhaustion. He looked back at the camp of Israel, at the fleeing Philistines. "The battle is not mine," he repeated in his soul. "It is yours, O Lord." The blood was a testament, the head a promise. He was a king in the making, not because he had wielded a sword, but because he had wielded unwavering faith. He knew that even as his people cheered, a seed of new fear, the fear of his power, was being sown in the heart of King Saul. The scripture records his victory, but the night before was his truest battle between fear and faith. These are the unwritten verses. That night, David learned that courage is not the absence of trembling, but the decision to act anyway. He exchanged the fear of man for the fear of God, and in that exchange, he found the strength to carry the fate of a nation. The story we tell is not about a stone that found its mark, but about a boy who chose his faith over his fear. It is a reminder that the greatest battles are fought in the silence, between a single heart and 1,000 doubts. What Goliath do you face? What quiet promise do you carry? The answer is waiting in your own silence just before the dawn breaks. The victory was loud, but the training was silent. The unwritten verses of the heart are always the loudest in the end. David walked away from the valley of Elah that morning, but he never left the silence of that night. He would go on to be a king, a warrior, a poet. But his truest identity was forged between dusk and dawn, alone with his God. He left behind a giant's head, but he carried forward a shepherd's faith. And that, dear listener, is a verse worth remembering.